welcome in to a Friday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always, and I hope you're ready for a basketball-filled weekend. Of course, we've got the NCAA Tournament first and second rounds, today being the second day of the first round, and then we'll have the second round matchups this weekend, and going on as I speak. And so one thing, this episode is going to be not necessarily what I initially planned on it being today, because this probably sounds selfish, but we do what we want to do sometimes, right? But I'm ready to get back to watching some more of the games that are going on right now. And so today's show is going to be a little bit shorter, but I do have a very lengthy conversation, a good conversation at that, with our good friend Dustin Schutte, who made an appearance on today's show, talking about Purdue and their run, which I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but that's only part of it. That's only the half of it. The other portion of the conversation, I think, if you don't enjoy that part, you'll definitely enjoy our discussion on new Indiana head coach Darian DeVries and his perspective, because I feel like during this, both he and I kind of talk about it from an aspect that I don't think either one of us, or at least I haven't really talked about yet on this show. So I look forward to sharing that with you. And then I'm going to save your guys' comments on the new hire, as well as my thoughts on Darian DeVries' introductory press conference for Monday. We'll do that on Monday's show. And then we'll also have some guests throughout the week as well. But I'm going to push those things back to Monday because, quite frankly, I just want to go back to watching the games, as I'm sure. And honestly, many of you probably aren't watching the show right now. And if you are, you've probably already consumed your helping of college basketball for the day. Or maybe because you're Indiana fans, maybe you're not watching at all because you feel left out. And I get that as well. But that is why we are going to make this show a little bit shorter and push both of those things to Monday's show. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the conversation that I just teased with our good friend, Dustin Schutte. Joining us now is longtime friend of the show, Mr. Dustin Schutte. Welcome back to In Touch with Indiana Sports, my friend.
Thanks for having me, John. It's been a while since we've had the opportunity to chat. So I know
I don't even know I don't know that you've been on since we made the calendar turn over to 2025. Maybe once, but I'm not too sure. It's been a while for sure.
Yeah, I don't remember. That's a good question. My memory is very foggy. There's been a lot of travel involved. So
speaking of traveling, like right now, for those who are observant and realize you're not in your normal locale, you have ventured off to the East Coast to watch Purdue out in Providence, Rhode Island.
Yes, I am. So I didn't know what to expect with Rhode Island. I knew it was a small state, but
the smallest, in fact.
Yeah, I did not know what to expect. So I came out here, and now I think if you come here in the wintertime or right around when I'm here when it's cold, there's not a lot to do. I think it probably would be better if it was summertime and maybe you could go out on the water or walk around a little bit more. But I will say the food is good, though. I had this seafood bouillabaisse, I think is what they call it here. It's basically just a bunch of seafood covered in this really good broth.
Okay.
So that was really good. We've got an Italian food dinner, and then I'm hitting up a brewery tomorrow. So it's not just concession food for me this week, although I did have a concession stand hot dog the other night.
I can't imagine outside of Providence and, like the city and maybe doing things on the water, what you would even do in the state of Rhode Island. Not to mention, like, what's the, like, if you're going from one side of the state to the next, can you be in the next state within like 45 minutes?
I would guess so. Okay. I don't know, but it seems like
you wouldn't know. Yeah.
It seems like all the like big city, quote unquote, big cities are very close together. So you know how like Indianapolis and Fort Wayne for you, Louisville and Lexington, like they're about like an hour apart, right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
My geography is correct? Okay.
Pretty close.
Frankfurt's probably an hour and a half, 2 hours or something. Like there's a good distance. It's like 10 minutes in Rhode Island is what I've picked up, like the big cities. And not to mention, like, this reminds me of like a college town. Like the
Okay.
downtown would be like comparable to Bloomington or West Lafayette. There's not a lot of skyscrapers, not a lot of major architecture, just like almost like a mixture between a beach town and a college town is how I could best describe it.
Any sign of like the mafia in the area? I know that's like a big, a big region. Or
I hope not.
I think it's a historically mafia-ridden area, something like that. But either way, we'll go ahead and I guess just dive into the March Madness, March Mayhem festivities, whatever you want to call it. Unfortunately, my Indiana Hoosiers not participating. I did send you a very nice text yesterday wishing High Point good luck, and it unfortunately did not work out for me. But how was that first game for Purdue? Did you feel the nerves for the Boilermakers? Did you feel like maybe Purdue, at least for certain points of that game, think they not regressed, but we're kind of going back to their old March Madness selves where they just struggled against double-digit seeds for whatever reason?
So I'm going to answer your question, but first I'm going to give you a little bit of an anecdote. And this was the first time I've ever covered a March Madness game.
Okay.
And sitting on the floor, I just have to tell you, like, I've covered a lot of games in a lot of different arenas, and the energy there was just so different. Like you can feel the do or die energy. I was seated right in front of the High Point student section. They brought a lot of fans, by the way. It was loud. They were energetic. It is a really fun and cool atmosphere. So I did not expect, like, you can just feel it pumping through your veins. So that I thought that was a really unique experience. Now, to answer the actual question you asked me, I don't want to say they would have regressed to like the previous seasons, but I think what popped into my mind was, like, especially in that second half, it was here we go again type of situation, because Purdue this season, if you go back to look at their 4-game losing stretch where they lost to Michigan, Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Indiana, they had an 11-point lead against Michigan. 12-point halftime lead against Indiana. They led Wisconsin by 9 in the first half, led Michigan State on the road by 7. They had a 10-point lead on the road against Illinois, and they kind of squandered all of those in the second half. So Purdue goes in, they finish the first half strong. It looks like they are the enforcer in that game. Then immediately within the first 4 minutes, High Point throws a bunch of punches, and all of a sudden it's a 4-point game. Purdue stretches it back out, gets it back up to 9 with a Jagari Harris 3, and then all of a sudden it's back down to a 3-point game. So at that point, I think there was about 6 or 7 minutes left. I think because of the struggles this team has faced, because of the fact that they've lost that kind of game 6 times in the last 9 outings, I think that the old thought of, like, oh boy, here we go again. This is the same Purdue we've seen for the last month. But Trey Kaufman-Wren hits a big shot with the shot clock expiring. Braden Smith gets a layup and then knocks down a 3, puts them back up 10, and Purdue was in control the rest of the way. So I don't know that, because I think this team is different. Like, I think those other teams, like the 2023 team that was a really disappointing team, right? The 2022 team that got beat by St. Peter's, Matt Painter said it repeatedly, like we didn't play, like, I don't want to say they didn't play hard, but they weren't diving for loose balls. They didn't have that same level of energy that St. Peter's did. So I don't, like, the effort was there, the energy was there. It was just like, are they going to be able to withstand this push? And it looked like for a few minutes there, because 80% of that building was High Point, right? Like, there's probably
are they from that part of the country?
They're from the East Coast, so I think High Point is in North Carolina, and so my guess is, now it's a pain in the ass to get to Providence from pretty much anywhere in the country, but I think East Coast flights are a little bit more direct because it's right up the coastline. But this was their first ever trip, so they brought in, they flew a bunch of students, fans, they flew them in, bussed them in. And then obviously, so you've got probably half the arena, in my estimation, I don't know, but this is just what it looked like from my view. Half the arena's High Point fans. And then all of those other teams, McNeese, Clemson, they obviously want to see the upset too. So they're all pulling for them. So basically Purdue's playing a road game. And so for them to pull through, I thought that showed a lot of mental toughness. Their veteran players stepped up. And so now they get a really talented McNeese team in the second round for a chance to, ironically, go to Indianapolis and play in the Sweet 16. So you could get a little bit of a home court advantage there if they're able to beat the Cowboys and Will Wade on Saturday.
There's something about the first round where, and honestly, I'm not seeing Indiana in this position a lot, mainly because they're not in the tournament very often. At least they haven't been in the last several years.
Right.
But something about getting the first round monkey off your back. There are certain teams that just really need to get that first win to, I think, kind of propel them forward, just kind of get the butterflies, the jitters off. And for some reason, I think Purdue is just one of those teams that fits that category. I mean, they're going to have another double-digit seed that they're going to face against that you already mentioned with McNeese. But for some reason, this McNeese team, they felt like they were the popular 12/5 pick this year. So popular to the point to where I didn't even fall for it, or at least I guess falling for it would have been a good thing. But I thought it was a facade. I thought Clemson was going to end up winning that game and that McNeese was just going to fall by the wayside. But I don't think this McNeese team, I'd seen Casey Bartley put this out on Twitter yesterday, I believe. And I think he kind of walked it back, and just because of the nature of the way the game ended. But he had said that he thought that letting McNeese have a lead is not something Purdue would want to have happen in this game, because it'll be a lot more difficult to come back on somebody like McNeese as opposed to someone who runs a different style of offense.
Yeah. I guess it depends. Like, I don't know.
They nearly lost yesterday, but for the good majority of that game, Clemson, I mean, they looked like they didn't even belong anywhere near the floor.
Yeah, for a majority of that game. I don't necessarily disagree with that point. I think what tends to happen sometimes, it's not to say that if McNeese got out to an early lead, I think Purdue could probably erase that. Like, they've got the skilled players. But sometimes what's been happening in those situations, and I think you saw it in the Michigan game. Now, they got good in the Big Ten tournament. Now, Purdue got good shots in that game. They just weren't falling. But like, on occasion, there have been times where in these, I don't want to say do or die situations, but in these games where you go back to that 4-game losing stretch where Purdue felt like it had to win if it wanted to win a Big Ten championship, sometimes those two guys press a little much. They get a little too rushed. They try to do too much. And I think that could be the issue, especially in this one and done type of situation, like win or go home, right? So if Purdue gets down, let's say McNeese comes out firing on all cylinders and it's an 8-10 point advantage for McNeese, I think Purdue has the skill and talent to overcome that. But my question is, do they have the patience? Can they settle things down? Can they rally the troops? Like we saw it last year. They did have that team with Mason Gillis, Lance Jones, Zach Edey. That team had, because they got down 9 points. I can't remember if it was 9 or 11, but 9 or 11 points to Tennessee in the Elite Eight game to get to the Final Four. And as soon as Tennessee went on that run, like it was erased like that. I don't know if this team would be able to do that. So that's why I get the point. Like, I don't think Purdue doesn't want to play from behind, right? Like, you want to build a 20-point lead and kind of play from in front. So that would be an intriguing, almost more of a mental thing, because like I said, the team has the skill. They've got the shooters. They've got the talent. They've got a really good, one of the best post players in Trey Kaufman-Renn. So talent-wise, yeah, but it's like, can you get over that mental hurdle? Can you kind of slow yourself down, collect your thoughts and just execute play after play and get yourself back into that game?
I think the last time we spoke, I'd asked you what you had thought Purdue's ceiling was for the postseason at the time, and really floor too, because I feel like it's a really big kind of fluctuation between, they could lose very early, but they also had the talent to make it all the way to the Final Four. Would you say that's still probably the case for them?
I think they have a path. I think they have a path to the Final Four. Now, I don't know that they're going to get there because they're going to have to play some really talented teams. I do like the fact that they get that. If they beat McNeese, I like the fact that they get those games in Indianapolis. Those are going to be basically home games, but they played Texas A&M in December in Gainbridge Fieldhouse and lost. They nearly got beat by USC in the first round of the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis. They got beat by 18 points by Michigan at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, so it's not that much of a difference. But what's going to be really intriguing, now this is all hypothetical, right? Obviously, if Purdue loses to McNeese, we throw this out the window.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing to me would be, if Gonzaga can pull off the upset, I like Purdue's matchup with Gonzaga more than I like it with Houston. So that's asking a lot. Now that's asking a lot.
But Gonzaga looked really scary against Georgia. Yes. Now maybe that's more so Georgia being overrated, like most of the bottom tier of the SEC that got in. But either way, a good performance from the Bulldogs.
It was a strong showing. So I think if there's an upset to where Gonzaga beats Houston, I think if Houston wins, Purdue's run probably does end in the Sweet 16. But I think if Gonzaga can pull off that upset, you're looking at the Elite Eight, and you're probably looking at a matchup with Tennessee.
Could be Tennessee, another rematch with Tennessee, right?
Could you imagine?
I feel like Purdue and Tennessee always play in the NCAA tournament.
Because this happened twice in the last.
Be the third time if it happens?
It would be the third time since 2019.
Wow.
Which is pretty frequent. I mean, I know it's like 6-7 years, but yeah, exactly. So, I think talent-wise, they can get there, but I do think they're going to have to get some breaks. But I think that speaks to the NCAA tournament, right? Like you have to get lucky at some point, basically. Like there's going to be a little bit of luck to get to that Final Four. Every coach kind of says that. So we'll see. I think, look, here's the other part of this too that we have not talked about. I talked about Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn. Purdue's bench was phenomenal yesterday. Camden Heide coming in, 11 points, 10 rebounds, his first double-double of his career. Miles Colvin with 4 points. He played some really good defense. Will Berg came in, there were stretches where he didn't even play. He comes in and gives them 10 minutes, and he gets a couple rebounds and 4 points, and was just playing extremely good basketball, especially on the defensive end. If Purdue can get that kind of production from their bench, I think sometimes in these March Madness situations, your bench can be a little bit timid, but I think the advantage is those two guys, Miles and Camden, even though they didn't play a lot, they do have experience in these tournament formats. Jakari Harris is a 4-star kid. He did not look frightened by the lights in the slightest. So if Purdue can get production from those 4 or 5 guys they bring in off the bench, that makes them an even more dangerous team, I think.
What did you make of the nightcap games in Providence with Kansas and Arkansas and then St. John's and Omaha? I fell asleep during the St. John's game, so I didn't really see how that played out. I saw they won by 30, but of course it sets up the fabled Rick Pitino, John Calipari rivalry, which will be interesting.
Yeah, I tweeted that out last night. Like we could get Rick Pitino, John Calipari, and neither Kentucky nor Louisville would be involved. So that's crazy. That's number one. The second thing is, and this is another anecdotal story, is obviously my fiance is from Omaha, and she had some family that attended Omaha. So I was sure to stick around and watch that game. It was good for about the first half, and then St. John's did St. John's things. That Kansas-Arkansas game was
probably the best game overall yesterday. I
think so. Yeah, that and the UC San Diego Michigan game that ended up being a good one too. But that was a really entertaining game, just back and forth. It looked like Kansas had it locked up. I think they were up 6. I was there for like 13 hours yesterday, John, so I may not get the details right about those two games, but I think that like Kansas was up 7 or 9 points in like the last 7-8 minutes, and then Arkansas comes roaring back. So it was kind of like one of those things where I'm watching the game, but I'm also kind of doing some other things. So I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, okay, Kansas. And then I look down and then look back up, and all of a sudden Arkansas's got the lead. It's like, well, how the hell did that happen? So I thought that was I agree with you. Now, I didn't see as much basketball as you probably did, but from the scores and from the night games that I did watch, I did think that was probably, for a full 40 minutes, that was probably the best game. And then last night,
you thought
Michigan
they could be on track for nearly 100 points apiece in that first half. It's kind of the way things were going.
Yeah, just back and forth. And the crazy thing is, like, I don't know how much Kansas paid for that roster, but they got to be kind of feeling like Indiana a little bit, in my opinion.
Hunter Dickinson has to have been, at least through the early years of NIL, the most, I hate to say he was overpaid, or maybe most overvalued player in the early years of this NIL era, based on what you got out of maybe not necessarily him as an individual, but what, Kansas has probably had some of their most mediocre years in their history in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, they didn't win a Big 12 title.
And they won how many straight? A lot. It was a lot.
Yeah, they had won like 18 out of 22 or something. I don't remember what it was. I don't. And that should be an example. So this is not me picking on Indiana either, but these are two really good examples that I think fans
Indiana
need
did waste a lot of money too, for being honest.
Well, but I wonder how much that'd be a conversation for a different day. Sometimes I wonder how much the coach has a say in who they get and how much people are like, you should offer, if I'm making a donation, you will offer it to this player. But anyway, that's beside the point. It should be a wake-up call that star rankings and pure talent are obviously important, but they ultimately don't matter. Because if you like AJ Storr, who was really good at Wisconsin, and he's at Kansas. They have Hunter Dickinson. I'm sure they've got, I know they've got other players, but I didn't follow Kansas basketball that closely this year. They're one and done in the NCAA tournament. IU goes out and pays Umar Ballo. They get Luke Goody from Illinois. Like, didn't work. And sometimes it's not just coaching, right? Like Bill Self's a really good coach. So you have to not just, and I always use this because it's probably the closest, but like, Purdue has like 2 4-star recruits on their roster, maybe 3, and they just kind of piecemeal things together, but it's guys that know their role and fit into a system. And so that's always been my frustration with Indiana. And a lot of people talk about, well, their recruiting isn't good enough. Their recruiting's been fine. They just are getting the wrong pieces.
Yes.
So I think that's what kind of happened with Kansas this year is you had really good pieces, but when they don't work together, you're going to have struggles.
Well, I guess since this seems like a good transition into something else I want to talk about. Obviously, Indiana has now hired Darian DeVries out of West Virginia. I'm not sure how closely you have been following the coaching search for the last several weeks, because I know the team you cover is doing really well and has been for the last several years. But what did you make of just kind of the overall coaching search? Or were you surprised about someone like Darian DeVries? Or where did you kind of see that thing going versus where it ended up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought Ben McCollum was option A, B, and C.
That's what I thought too. I was a big Ben McCollum guy, and I was enjoying watching them beat up on Missouri last night.
Yeah, and I think the big reason for that is just because I heard all of the Kirk Cignetti comparisons. Like, this is a guy who can come in and immediately change the program. He can immediately overhaul everything, and we'll get to the NCAA tournament. And, so when DeVries was DeVries.
Yeah, it looks like it would be Darian DeVries.
Yeah, but it's actually
Darian DeVries. Yeah, so yeah, we had to come to terms with that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a good coach. So the criticism I've heard is that, basically Indiana went from a coach who couldn't get him into the NCAA tournament to a coach who couldn't get him into the NCAA tournament. Well, that's not necessarily an apples.
Yeah,
that's not an apples to apples comparison, because West Virginia, basically, he had to assemble. I mean, you got to assemble a new roster when you take over.
That was coming off of the Bob Huggins nonsense. We have to remember that.
Yes, right. So I can't imagine. I don't know West Virginia's financial situation. Can't believe it's up in the upper tier among college basketball programs. And like, I think everybody would agree that West Virginia should have been in the tournament this year.
Yes.
Like, right. Like, we all agreed.
Everyone was saying it should have been WVU over UNC. That was the big talking point on Selection Sunday. One of them, at least.
So you are able to do that in your first season. And I think, like, I'm fine with the hire. Now, do I think that he's going to bring them a national championship? I don't know. Like, it's hard to gauge that.
Yes.
But can he get him in the turn? Like, the thing I think people need to do, and people are not going to like this, especially on your show, so my apologies if you get hate mail. But the expectation to me shouldn't be national championships. The NCAA tournament is such a crapshoot. Like, it's hard. Just like, can you get – the way I would look at it if I'm an Indiana fan, can this guy – get us to the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten every single year? Can he regularly get us into the NCAA tournament? Because if you get into the NCAA tournament and you're at the top of the Big Ten, you're probably going to get a good seed in March Madness, and that sets you up for a run.
Yep.
So, like, this idea that you have to get a national championship coach, like, just get somebody who's going to give you a chance.
Like, and here's the other thing, too. Like, this day and age, whenever you're looking at like the phrase national championship coach, there's not a lot of those out there right now. You have Dan Hurley, you've got Tom Izzo, you've got Bill Self, maybe a few more, but most of the ones that you think of, John Calipari, most of the ones that you think of, they're all gone. They've moved on. They're not doing this new era of college basketball. They've retired. So there's eventually going to be a new guard that rises up and becomes these new championship head coaches. I doubt we're going to see Dan Hurley three-peat this year, and maybe we get Bruce Pearl winning a national championship for the first time. Maybe it's Todd Golden in Florida. Both of those would be first-time national champions, and point being, you're more than likely if you're a part of a coaching search nowadays, you're going to get somebody who probably has a lot of upside as a head coach, but they don't necessarily have the experience or history of being a winner, like at that level, of course.
Right. Well, and I think the interesting thing is, like, I think most people would say Matt Painter's a top 5 coach in college basketball. If not, if he doesn't crack your top 5, he's definitely in your top 10. And I think there are a lot of Indiana fans that if he wasn't at Purdue, if he was say at Creighton or Iowa, people would be like, let's go get Matt Painter. Right? Like, I think that's how you have to view it. And I think DeVries is that guy who can get you into the NCAA tournament regularly. I think he can get you into to the top of the Big Ten standings on a regular basis. And I think right now that's where Indiana wants to be, needs to be, because then you're playing competitive basketball every single season. Like, you've seen this program has now seen the lowest of lows, right? Like going through the Tom Crean stuff early in his career. But then he was able to get him up to winning Big Ten titles. And even though it wasn't good on the season, like, there's a lot of people now that have Tom Crean remorse, right? Like, maybe we shouldn't have fired him.
Like, wow, we could do Tom Crean's better than so-and-so. I mean, he's better than the last 2 coaches Indiana's had in terms of what he was able to do.
So, and I think to some degree that I think how difficult the last 8 or 9 years have been, I think there's a lot of people that have maybe recalibrated the expectation. Now, that's not to say, like, I understand that Indiana wants to be in the national championship conversation, but you got to be in the NCAA tournament conversation first before you can be national championship. So I think a little bit of this too is the Curt Cignetti effect, right? Like, when a guy comes in and wins immediately 11 games, everybody's like, well, why can't we do that in basketball? Well, again, like, it's not necessarily the same. Like, Indiana could bring in a team that immediately wins a Big Ten title, and you could be done in the first round of the NCAA tournament. That's how much of a crapshoot it is. I don't have a better word for it. It's just so matchup dependent that, again, if this was like, if you're playing best of 7 series, then you're like, yeah, let's get us a coach who can win an S. But it's one game. It's a crazy month. You play in a difficult league. It's really grueling to just get in the top 4 or 5. So this is not where the coaching search thought a lot of late nights, John. This is not where I thought the coaching search would go. But I do think that they got a quality coach. And I think the thing is it's almost good. In a way, I know I'm rambling here.
It almost just feels like it's right, because I feel like most people, if they weren't upset about the fact that Darian DeVries missed the tournament as well, I feel like it's just a lot of unknown. And the biggest, I think, if you're an Indiana fan and you're looking at the best thing about Darian DeVries is that he's a very hardworking guy from what I've read about so far. And I make the comparison, I've already done it a few times, to Pat Kelsey at Louisville. Yeah, Louisville had the benefit of playing in a very easy ACC this year, and their seed kind of proved to be more where they actually belong than many people initially thought based on what happened against Creighton. But either way, Pat Kelsey took a completely depleted Louisville team from the last 2 years under Kenny Payne and immediately made them second place in the ACC and, like you said, comfortably in the tournament. If he does that every year at Louisville and they eventually get a run to a Final Four or even a national championship, that's all you can really hope for. But again, that second part, the Final Four and the national championship, that's way bigger of a variable than I think people will ever really realize.
Yeah, and the thing I would say is to me, the expectation is, okay, I'm going to recalibrate this on my end. I think what would have happened if you brought in a Ben McCollum, or let's just throw out some other names. If you would have brought in Ben McCollum, Chris Beard, Bruce Pearl, Will Wade, the expectations are up here, right? Immediately you think, we got to get to a Final Four. This guy's going to get us a national championship. I think with Darian DeVries, the thing he's going to have working in his favor is it's not the most attractive hire. Like it's not a consensus. It's not a consensus. This is going to be a home run hire. So I think the expectations are like here. So if you get to 20-12, right? Like if you get to 20-12 and you're in the NCAA tournament in year one, that's an improvement.
Now here's the thing: 20-12, Indiana wasn't far off from that this year. If you're 20-12, you kind of hope it's a good 20-12. You know what I mean? Like you don't have the nonsensical losses. You win a lot more games that you don't lose about 34 or 5 times in the season. You know what I mean?
Correct.
Like, you don't have those types of results.
Right. You don't have those type of results because it's as simple to me as if Indiana beats Northwestern and Nebraska this season, they're probably in the NCAA tournament, right?
If they beat Oregon, I think they're in the NCAA in the final in the Big Ten tournament.
But I'm saying don't put it in the Big Ten tournament. Just if you win those 2 games in the regular season, the Big Ten tournament is obsolete.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, those are the kind of things, probably if you win one of those games, honestly. But to me, that's what it comes down to. Can we take those gradual steps as a program to get us where we need to be? And where we need to be, is not in the Final Four every single year. It's not going to happen. Like that's not going to happen for any program.
Especially now. Like there was already parity in basketball before. There's even more now with the transfer portal. You're also seeing that in college football. That's why Indiana was officially a part of a conversation in football like they never have been, because you can flip a roster that easily, and it's made the talent level a lot more spread out rather than just being focused on the traditional powers. So I think we've before we kind of put a bow on this, any last things on kind of this topic of conversation?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is like I would not get up in arms one way or the other about DeVries and the hire. Just let it play out. Let it see how it goes. I don't think it's going to be flash in a pan. We're going to be 25-5 his first year. I think Indiana, if they are able to just make the NCAA tournament, and I know some of this was like, that's what we said about Mike Woodson too, right? Like just make the NCAA tournament. But
I think you want to make it and not be on the bubble. I think that needs to be kind of an asterisk. Like, don't be on the bubble all season long.
Well, that's true. But I think even in year one, even if you just get into the tournament, I think that's a victory. And then the next season, that's where you can start to build a little bit. So it's going to be interesting. I know Indiana, this isn't just Indiana fans. There aren't a lot of college sports fans that have patience for anything anymore, which is annoying. Matt Painter's been at Purdue for 20 seasons now, and he just made it to the Final Four. And again, there are 90% of college basketball programs would take him in a heartbeat. So just because you're not winning a national championship or getting to the Final Four every year doesn't mean you don't have a good coach. So just let it marinate, let him do his thing, and see how it goes. Because I think this is one that's like, okay, this is an interesting hire, but I think that's one that you can say, yeah, I think we got our guy in 3 to 5 years.
Dustin, as always, I appreciate your time and conversation, and good luck to McNeese tomorrow.
You got to throw that in there, don't you?
I had to.
Fair.
Now you won't get a text from me about it.
There we go.
Well, good stuff as always. I know we don't have Dustin on very much on the show, but we will be doing another edition of Out of Touch here at the conclusion of the basketball season. That's really kind of the best time for both myself, Dustin, as well as Mitchell to kind of reconvene. I know Out of Touch releases, for those of you who like those, are not nearly as frequent as they used to be. They used to do those weekly and then bi-weekly, and now it's just kind of whenever we have time. That's just the way things go sometimes. So, but that's going to do it for today's show. Apologies for the short length. If that's not something that you enjoy. If you like them being a little bit longer. Some people like the shorter ones, though. I like having a good variety every once in a while. And plus, like I said, I'm sure many of you are ready to get back to watching some of the games going on right now. So we'll be back Monday to do it all again. And like I said, I do want to get through your guys' comments on Darian DeVries and your thoughts. And if you haven't left one, you want to let me know your thoughts on Indiana's new head coach, do that down below. And I do want to share my reactions to what was said during his introductory press conference as well. So again, we'll do all of that next week and more. So until then, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.